Okay, thank you very much everyone for coming. We're delighted to welcome you today to this second installment in the 2026 Last Lecture series being delivered by Professor Kristen Eichensehr. It's a tradition to hold these last lectures toward the end of the year, in which a number of faculty members are invited to provide some valedictory guidance, reflections, and advice to the graduating class before they embark into the world, as well as to the wider HLS student body. The series kicked off at the end of March with Professor Sitkoff. Today, we are honored to be joined by Professor Eichensehr, and finally, we will hear from Professor Ben Sachs later in April. Now, Professor Sitkoff, in his speech last month, expressed a brief fear that the real reason we had invited him was because we intended for that to actually be his last lecture at Harvard Law School. So just for the avoidance of any doubt, I would like to emphasize for any future faculty who may be listening that an invitation to deliver one of the last lectures is intended to recognize professors who have been particularly impactful, beloved, and admired in a given year. It is not, I repeat, not a threat. Continuing, Professor Eichensehr is an expert in national security, cybersecurity, foreign relations, and international law. Here at Harvard, she has taught several courses over the past year, including economic tools of national security, foreign relations, and the evolving national security state. So I am no prophet, but one thing Professor Eichensehr probably is not going to speak about today is how quiet or boring her areas of law currently are. Professor Eichensehr is a member of the State Department's Advisory Committee on International Law and serves as an advisor on the fourth restatement of the Foreign Relations Law of the United States. She also serves on the editorial boards of Justice Security, as well as the Journal of National Security Law and Policy. Prior to entering academia, Professor Eichensehr clerked for Justices Sandra Day O'Connor and Sonia Sotomayor of the Supreme Court of the United States, as well as for then-Judge Merrick Garland on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. She also served as Special Assistant to the Legal Advisor of the U.S. Department of State and practiced at Covington and Burling in Washington, D.C. And one final, perhaps less official but very important accolade, I might add, is that if you check the Helios evaluations of any course taught by Professor Eichensehr, which is pretty important, you will see that they are wonderfully uniform in confirming the immensely high regard in which she is held by her students. So with that, the class marshals representing the class of 2026 are delighted to introduce Professor Kristen Eichensehr.
Thank you to Ronan and to all the class marshals for inviting me to speak with you today, and to all of you for taking time for a bonus lecture. I understand I am your next to last lecture, so that's good. But I am truly honored to be invited to speak with you as you wrap up your time at Harvard. And I want to focus today on 3 points. The first is to expect the unexpected. The second is to pace yourself. And the third is why law and lawyers matter in a world of rampant law breaking. These aren't so much advice as they are reflections that I hope might be useful to you. If they were advice, I should tell you they would be, at least in parts, fully in the realm of do what I say, not what I do. But with that caveat, here we go. So first, expect the unexpected. You are graduating into a world of dynamic and dramatic and evulsive change, both domestically and internationally. Whatever you may think of those changes, whether you think they're good, bad, somewhere in the middle, varies by day, it can be disconcerting to be sent out into the world where it feels like the ground is shifting under your feet, where things have changed dramatically since you started college, since you chose to go to law school, or even since you started law school. I know something about this from personal experience. I was in college here at Harvard for the 9/11 attacks and the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. And then my law school class graduated in 2008. We graduated just a few months before the financial crisis and the ensuing Great Recession. But even so, it feels like the pace of these shocks is increasing. So we've had the COVID pandemic and worldwide shutdowns. We've had grinding wars with enormous human tolls. We've had the United States turning against longstanding allies and the international system it has led for decades, including threats to take over territory of longstanding allies and recent threats to withdraw from NATO. Plus, there's whatever is about to happen and already happening with AI. And all of those have legal aspects. There are legal questions, legal implications from all of that. But even if you just look at law, your class, your graduating class this year, has seen significant changes just in your 3 years in law school. So things that I learned as bedrock law in law school have now been well and truly buried. Remember Chevron? You were the last class that learned Chevron in leg reg when it was still like kind of sort of on life support, but still sort of good law. And I think we can safely all probably say a preemptive rest in peace for Humphrey's executor. But that's just the domestic side. International law, too, is in serious jeopardy of being effectively overturned in significant part. I don't want to suggest that compliance with international law has ever been perfect, either in aspiration or in practice. Of course it hasn't been. But we've reached a new point, and this is a point where powerful countries, including this one, have stopped even trying to argue that they are complying with international law. And they act or threaten to act in ways that violate the most basic foundations of the post-World War II international legal order, including the prohibitions on the use of force and on war crimes. At a speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos in January, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney declared that we have reached a point of, as he put it, rupture in the world order. He said, "This is the end of a pleasant fiction and the beginning of a harsh reality, and it's a rupture, not a transition." So what comes after a rupture? You've got to have a transition to whatever comes next, but this is a rupture. So in the face of all this upheaval, what's a lawyer to do? My charge to you is this: to do your best to expect the unexpected. This isn't just a good idea. I think for lawyers, it's a responsibility. Lawyers are strategic thinkers, and from the time you graduate, especially because you are graduating from Harvard, people will turn to you for your counsel. And your job is to be a source of expertise, of wisdom, of accurate information about the law, and also about the world in which the law functions. So part of your job is to understand and process changes so that you can help other people understand and process changes too. And so as all these shocks happen, and I do think they will continue to happen, the laws will change. You'll need to learn from them. You'll need to figure out how to move forward in this changed world. And so the most important thing you've learned in law school is not the substance of the law. Substance changes, it gets overruled, it gets overtaken by events. The most important thing to take away from your time in law school is knowing how to figure out the right answers and to have confidence in yourselves that you can figure out the right answers even as the law and the world shift. Don't get me wrong, you will be an expert in a substantive area, maybe multiple substantive areas of law, but with the possible exception of a clerkship, a judgeship, or maybe the day before the bar exam, right now is probably the broadest that your legal knowledge will ever be. So take that in for a second. You know the most about the law now, the most about the most types of law that you ever will, maybe by finals. But you will go into jobs where you will specialize. You will become an expert, a true expert in a particular area of law. And from then on, you'll have the privilege of fielding questions from friends and family where you explain to them, yes, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not that kind of a lawyer. I'm not the right kind of a lawyer for whatever it is that they inevitably need. But a big part of your role as a lawyer is helping people and yourself, your clients, to plan for and exist in uncertain futures. I was doing a little light reading recently, The Perils of Being a Law Professor. I was reading The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. And she wrote in the preface to that book the following. She said, "No matter how much we may be capable of learning from the past, it will not enable us to know the future." That's right. But I think part of our job as lawyers is to try to see at least a little bit into the future, to see around corners and to help colleagues, clients, the legal community, and even the broader public to see the future a little more clearly, despite whatever shocks may be coming. So this is where we get to expect the unexpected. To do that effectively, we as lawyers don't have the luxury of burying our heads in the sand or turning away from the news even when it's deeply troubling, unpleasant, or just plain grim. And that brings me to my second point. Pace yourself. So when I first started working at a law firm, my partner mentor took me out to lunch and gave me some advice about how to approach this brave new world of private practice. One thing that he said that stuck with me is, you can't write briefs for 8 hours a day. Day one on the job, I thought, is this because I have to write them for 12 hours a day, 10 hours a day, what are we talking? That's not at all what he meant. What he actually meant was to say you can't do it that long. You cannot do the most intellectually demanding part of your job all the time. To do your clearest thinking, to do your best work, sometimes you need to just take a break. So talk to someone, go for a walk, touch grass, just watch out for the turkeys. But in other words, you need to learn to pace yourself. So here's another personal story. When I was in high school, I ran track and cross country. I was a confirmed sprinter, but I nonetheless found myself out on cross-country courses, which, if you don't know, are 5 kilometers or 3.1 miles. In the interest of full disclosure, I was not good at this. I found it extremely painful and, quite frankly, kind of hated it. But the starting gun would go off at the start of a race, and I would take off. And I was a decent sprinter, so for the first 400 meters or so, I would be out in front. By the end of the race, I would be very much closer to the back. My parents were dedicated supporters of my running career, and after every race, my dad, who was a former coach himself, would say to me, well, if they called the race after the first 400 meters, you would have won. So why did I do this slightly irrational thing of sprinting at the beginning of a race that I would inevitably lose? And the answer was because it was fun. It was at least, I wanted to, it was at least a little bit fun to be at least a little bit out in front for at least a little bit of a race. And so in pacing with law and your legal career sometimes, you will find yourself doing things, jumping into things, maybe putting a lot of time, effort, mental energy into things, even if it's a little bit irrational, because you care about it and because it's important to you. This might be a particular legal matter, it might be a passion project, it might be a pro bono assignment, and you'll be sprinting in the law because you want to. Other times in your legal practice, you're going to have to sprint because you have to. So things will have happened for you or for your family, and you'll be behind. You'll be up against a deadline. Or things will have happened for your clients, they will have happened in the world, and you will have to push yourself as hard as you can for as long as you can to get through that crunch period. As Ronan alluded to, a number of students have asked me this semester whether I like teaching in semesters that are relatively quiet in national security or foreign relations law, or whether I like teaching in semesters where there's a lot going on. And the honest answer is that it depends what it is that's going on. But the broader point here is that you will have to learn how to pace yourself. And sometimes you can control the pace, and other times you can't. And you'll have to learn to pace yourself through your career through both of those kinds of times. And part of that pacing is the need to recover, to balance yourself in some way that is not just about your legal practice. So make time for your friends, make time for your family, make time for your hobbies. If you don't have hobbies, you should get some. You should also try at least to get or keep some friends who are not lawyers. They're great for perspective. And keep in mind that even if you are the best lawyer in the world, even if you are the ideal lawyer for your client, you're probably replaceable to your clients. You're not replaceable to your family or to your friends. This brings me to my final point, why law and lawyers matter in a world of rampant law breaking. So here I want to quote the American president. Not that one, not the current one. The 1995 Rob Reiner movie. If you're looking for entertainment, 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. In the movie, Martin Sheen plays a presidential advisor. This is, of course, before he became himself a great American president in the West Wing. But in the movie, Sheen's character is a presidential advisor, and he says to the president, "Oh, you only fight the fights you can win? No, you fight the fights that need fighting." And for today's lawyers, there are a lot of fights that need fighting. Fighting them doesn't necessarily mean that you will win, and you may well end up on opposite sides with other people in this room. You may end up on opposite sides from other lawyers you respect and admire, and that is okay. Part of the function of law is to enable disagreements and to fight the good fights. So fight the fights that need fighting. And in that spirit, let me disagree here with a prominent legal scholar, one for whom I have a great deal of respect. This scholar argued recently that with respect to unilateral uses of force by the US president, quote, law is irrelevant, and debates about the legality of presidential uses of force are empty. I think that's wrong, and I think it's deeply counterproductive. It's wrong because both the actors who could restrain the president and the tools that they would use are legal ones. The law is not irrelevant, it's absolutely crucial. The US Constitution is a legal document. It creates a Congress, it imbues it with authorities, including the power to declare war and to control appropriations. Congress has passed a law, the War Powers Resolution, that includes procedures for passing another law to direct the president to terminate hostilities. If Congress were to use its appropriations power to control the president's uses of force, that would also be a legal action, either declining to pass a law to appropriate funds for military operations, or passing a law that provides appropriations but only subject to certain conditions. Congress has these powers because of law, the Constitution, and the powers that it would use are also legal ones. It is certainly true that politics plays an enormous role in whether legal actors choose to deploy their legal authorities. But just because politics may influence whether or when law is enforced does not mean that law is irrelevant. If the politics align, if political actors activate, the most authoritative tools they have are legal ones. And that's why I think claims about law's irrelevance are also deeply counterproductive. Saying that the law is irrelevant and that debates about the legality of uses of force are empty seeds the ground that critics and skeptics of law very much want lawyers to give up. It plays into the idea that law doesn't matter, that it's just politics all the way down, and in politics, everything's up for grabs, and everything's open to debate. And yes, it is certainly true that the boundaries between law and politics can get fuzzy at times, but I think lawyers need to stand their ground in defending the idea that law is different. Law is not the same as politics. Law has particular moral authority that mere political views do not. Once foundational commitments about the nature of government and processes for lawmaking are made, everything is no longer up for grabs. Law establishes the guardrails for political disagreements and can help keep politics from going too far awry or too far off the rails. Preemptive surrender about the importance of law, I think, is particularly worrisome in the international realm. So international law is made up of both positive law, like treaties, and also customary international law, which depends on state practice and states' views about whether that practice is legally required. International law depends on states airing legal views, both saying what they believe is illegal and saying what they believe is legal. Arguing that law is irrelevant shuts down the very debates about where the legal lines are that are absolutely necessary to have international law. And shutting down those debates short-circuits international law's already imperfect enforcement mechanisms. So suggesting that legal debates are not worth having risks becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy that makes international law, imperfectly followed and imperfectly enforced as it already is, it makes it even less constraining going forward. And then where would we be? I don't think we'd be in a better place. The international legal order is imperfect. It has always been imperfect. But what we have now, what we may be losing, is at least better than the lawless world that came before it. It came out of the ashes of 2 world wars that led to its construction. And are we better off with this order now? Are we better off with international law? I think the answer to that is a resounding yes. And if the most basic tenets of international law, like the prohibition on the use of force, the protection of civilians in armed conflict, and prohibitions on war crimes, if those rules are to continue, they have to be reiterated, they have to be defended, and they have to be continually reinforced. At the very least, nihilism about law's irrelevance shouldn't come from lawyers. In Youngstown Sheehan 2 versus Sawyer, this is the steel seizure case, Justice Jackson's concurrence, it's very well written, has a lot of memorable lines, including a bunch of lines with contemporary relevance, including that emergency powers tend to kindle emergencies, and warnings to Congress about letting power slip through its fingers. But let me end here by paraphrasing another of Justice Jackson's lines. So he ends his opinion by saying that the institutions of free government may be destined to pass away, but it is the duty of the court to be the last, not first, to give them up. So I say to you that on some of the biggest issues and gravest challenges of the moment, it is the duty of lawyers to be the last, not the first, to give up on the law. Finally, as you end your time here at Harvard, I hope you understand how important it is that you are all here. Your voices and your perspectives in this place, in your classes, in your graduating class, and in the world after Harvard Law School matter tremendously. Some of you have faced special challenges to get here and to succeed here. Many of those challenges you have undoubtedly handled quietly or maybe even silently. Others have been extremely public. So let me just say to our international students, your perspective matters and it enriches everyone's experience to have you here at Harvard. Thank you for persevering to be here. Thank you for your faith in the value of engaging with this country and with this institution. And to all of you, I know I speak not just for myself, but for my faculty colleagues in saying that we are proud of you, we are excited for you, we are excited because of you, and we cannot wait to see what you do next. Congratulations, and thank you.